Blonde and Beyond. I want to welcome you to this show and introduce myself first. My name is the Honorable Lee B. First. I'm the former supervising judge of the Workers' Compensation Board of the entire state of New York. I am the former president of the Metropolitan Women's Bar Association. Also, I have written a book, Justice is Blonde, which is the unorthodox story of an orthodox woman. How you can have humor and be orthodox, be a judge, be a foreigner. And the name of the book, as I said, is Justice is Blonde. Today, I'm going to digress from some of my humorous stories that I tell you. Recently, my grandson, Daniel First, had his bar mitzvah. And his father, Mitchell First, who is my son, who is an attorney but also a historian, spoke about the life of Daniel in Jewish history. And everyone found it so interesting that I am going to summarize what he said for you. Because in Jewish life, the name is very important that is given to a child. The child lives up to that name. It's part of your soul. Therefore, so who was Daniel in Jewish history? He was a prophet. And he has a separate book dedicated to him. He's not read on the Saturday together with when we read the Bible. He is read all by himself. He's a very important prophet. Now, around 500 BC, the Jews lived in Israel, a little prior thereto. And all of a sudden, the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, he decided that he's going to make a war against the Jewish nation. And he won the war and destroyed the first temple that we built. And he took captives, the Jews. Daniel was one of his first captives, and they all had to live in Babylonia. He did not treat them very well, but not that badly. And the Jews started, that is Iraq today. Babylonia was a beautiful country. They started to bring all their customs there, and they learned Torah, and they wrote the Babylonian Talmud while in Babylon. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar was the king there. And Nebuchadnezzar saw that Daniel was a holy person, and he asked him to explain certain things to him about a dream that he had on Daniel. And Daniel was a very wonderful person, and he said, you are going to have good luck, and this dream, whatever happened to you, is a wonderful thing. So what happened after that, there was another king, and his name was Belteshazzar. And he decided, since Daniel can tell everything, he is going to rely on Daniel because he saw on a wall a handwriting, but he did not understand the handwriting. So he quickly called Daniel the prophet, and he said, explain to me what this handwriting means. So Daniel said, this means that you are going to have bad luck. Very bad things are going to befall you. And that night, this king was killed. And because of this story in the world, in America, we say he saw the handwriting on the wall, which means he saw it, the end was in sight. We use that terminology now. So we see that Daniel was a very truthful person, even though he thought he would lose his life. But if he told the truth, but he anyway told the truth. Also, he was a very fine person. When he lived in Babylon, he refused to drink their wine of the Babylonians and eat their foods. He only ate vegetables and he drank water. And for that, God rewarded him. So that God rewarded him so that he became a very healthy and a strong person. What happened in the year 538, Persia defeated Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar and all the people, those kings were no more. and King Cyrus became in charge of Israel, the Jewish nation. So King Cyrus was a wonderful king, and he made the Cyrus Declaration, which said, in fact, that Jews who wish to return to their own land, Israel, may now do so. That's why a lot of Jewish people today, even they are named Cyrus. So what was this declaration to be compared to in today's society? We compare this declaration to the Balfour Declaration, when in 1917 the British Foreign Secretary said, we favor that the Jewish nation should return to the land, their own land of Palestine. What happened in 1920 after the First World War? This statement by England was ratified. Let's see if it was 1920. In 1920 by the Weimar Conference, and it was said that the Jews will now have their own land, Palestine, which was not what we had. We had a big piece of land. We had all of the land that today belongs to Jordan, and all the land which we got in 1967. But something happened. With nations, a word is not a word. In 1921, they had another conference. The Allies, after the last war, had a conference, and Britain said Britain said that we are going to create another nation just for the Arabs, so they also will have a land. And they created Transjordan, which today is Jordan. They call it Transjordan. In other words, they gave the Jews first the land. Now they took away, you won't believe this, 80% of the land that they gave to the Jews, they now gave to the Arabs, and they call it Transjordan. With the intent, the Arabs are going to live in Transjordan, or today Jordan, and the Jews will then live in 20% of the area which they were given prior thereto. 20% of it only, and that area was to be occupied by the Jews, and they called it Palestine at that time, and the West Bank was included in the land that was given to the Jews in 1921. So what happened is, it's a big tragedy now that when we speak about Palestinians, before 1960, Palestinians up to that era were the Jews. The Jewish people got this land of Palestine. Today, they imagine that they got this land and they got Transjordan, and they refuse to live in Jordan. Only in recent times a myth has been created. Palestinian is now a word applied to invent a nation. They say the Palestinians lived in that 20%, when in fact there was no. They never lived in Jerusalem. They never lived in that area. There is no nation like Palestinians. What makes a nation? A nation is a culture. It's a language. It's a religion. None of these things existed for those Arabs. The Arabs, they lived all over. They all had the same religion. There was no one like a Palestinian at that time. Like in Siberia, Siberia is not a country. Palestine was not a country. Siberia is part of Russia. They don't have their own culture. They don't have their own religion. Now, as I mentioned before, we learned from Daniel that it is essential to be truthful and to stick to your principles. He was such a fine man. But do we have people like that today? Hardly. One high-ranking United Nations officer, I want to speak to you now about him. His name was Ralph Galloway. In 1958, there was one truthful person, and he said, I want want to read it to you. The Arab states do not want to solve the refugee problem. They want to keep it as an open sore, as an affront to the United Nations, and as a weapon against Israel. Arab leaders do not give a damn whether Arab refugees live or die. Now, we had another Arab leader who told the truth from Saudi Arabia. In 1954, the king of Saudi Arabia outright said, Israel to the Arab world is like a cancer to the human body. We Arabs total 50 million people in the world. Why don't we sacrifice 10 million just so we could live in pride and self-respect? He didn't say if he wanted to be one of the 10 million. However, that is the way the Arabs felt. Now, more recently now, the Saudi Arabian prince finally told the truth, which we all are aware of anyway, but he did state it. Of course, if God granted us a wish, we would like the Palestinians to vanish off the face of the earth. We know they are only nice to us because of our money, but their disappearance would be my second wish. The first wish I have is the disappearance of Israel. There you have one truthful Arab. Therefore, in today's society, we should have more people like Daniel or like people who do tell the truth, so that finally we're going to have a world where people have principles and they have truth. As for the Jewish history that I referred to before, I read a very interesting article by Rabbi Geoffrey Haber. He said, the West Bank is occupied Palestinian land. Quotation mark. This is the greatest myth created in the world today. Because I have just told you, the West Bank and 20% of the land was given to the Jewish nation of Palestine at that time. It was never given to the Arabs. The Arabs were supposed to settle in Transjordan if they wanted to. Jordan was a country for them, but they wanted to stay in Israel. So therefore, the big lie is the greatest lie ever perpetrated on the whole world. That's what he says. To claim that Palestine is their country, that Jerusalem is their capital, for that reason, they have a right to have suicide bombs to kill innocent people, because that is their claim. It is their land. What happened never before has a complete lie on such a large scale been so successful. If Arab animosity to Israel is based upon their love of their brother Arabs, that they want the Palestinians to have their own state, where was that love when Jordan occupied the area before the '67 war? Jordan had the area, and then when we won, we got the land back to which we were entitled. They never said a word that the king of Jordan is occupying Arab land. Did you know that for 19 years, Jordan occupied that land? Not a word was said. Now, Jerusalem could never have been the capital of Palestine. Why? Because there was no Palestinian country. It never existed. They invented that term. In the entire history of nations, listen to this, Jerusalem was never the capital, other than the capital of the Jewish nation. The ancient Israel, which today, of course, is the modern Israel. So how can there be a claim on Jerusalem as the capital of the Arab state when the Arab state never existed? Here are some cold facts that I wish to tell you at this time. King David built the city of Jerusalem. King Solomon was his son, and he built the temple in the city of Jerusalem. This commonwealth of Israel lasted for 1,000 years, approximately. There was only one break. 400 years after King David built the city, the Babylonians came in, invaded them, took them captive, and then when the Persians defeated them, then they came back. The Jews were allowed to come with the help of Cyrus the Great of Persia. Therefore, Persia did rule there at one time, and Israel rebuilt the temple in their capital. After that, the second temple was destroyed, as many of you know, by the Romans. And the Romans came into Israel, and they ruled there. And then came the Crusaders. They would go. The Crusaders were in charge also. And then who else was in charge of Israel? The Ottoman Empire, the Turks. And after that, it was the British. And of course, now you know the history. In Israel, in old Israel, or in Israel where we are today, the Arabs never had their own nation, that they ruled Israel. By them to say that we occupy their nation is ridiculous, or that Jerusalem is their capital, when there never was a nation. One of the problems why I am giving this lecture today is that so few people actually know the correct history of Israel. So if lies like Adolf Hitler did are repeated often enough, people begin to think that they are the truth. What makes a people? Why do we refer to the Arabs living there as the Palestinian people? Here, what makes a people is asked. There are 4 elements that define a people: language, religion, culture, and cuisine. For example, the Chinese and the Japanese are both Orientals, but they are 2 different countries. They are 2 different nations. They have a different language. They have a different religion, a different culture, and a different cuisine. But the Palestinians speak the same language as the rest of the Arabs. There's nothing to distinguish them from the rest of the Arab nation. And there never was. It's just a region that exists, and now they claim that they have a country there and we are occupying their country. Just like the Sahara is a region, it's not a country. The Sahara Desert is a region. There is no Sahara country, as I said, nor are there Saharan people. The Arabs living in that region are Libyans, Moroccans, etc. Because Palestine is a region and not a country, England was able to carve it up. They carved up the whole thing, as I told you. They created the Kingdom of Jordan. So the United Nations was also able to get involved because Palestine was not a country. They decided to carve it up. Had the Arabs accepted in 1948 the division of the Arabs with the Jews, but there was the partition, as is known, then the Arabs would have had their own country, maybe named Palestine, and the Jews would have had their own nation, Israel. But they didn't like a compromise. So they declared war. And of course, no two nations were created at that time. So they never got a Palestine state, never in their history. To say that we occupy their state is an outright lie. They have a right to live freely anywhere today. Nobody says you have to leave your land. They are even in the Israeli government. They live there, they have rights. They also get welfare. They get money for having each child. Now, from where comes the right in their mind that they should have a Palestinian state as of this time? Imagine if the Mexican-American community in California, whose numbers are greater than the number of Palestinians in the West Bank, decides tomorrow to claim that the United States is occupying their land. The Mexicans, if they decided that. If the United States government says, no, you can live here, but you cannot have your own state in the United States. And then the Mexicans have decided to have suicide bombers and shoot at all the Americans living in California, because they decide that they are their own nation and we are occupying them. What do you think? What would happen then? This is precisely why there was never a suggestion of any Palestinian state. Not under the Romans, not under the Crusaders, and not under the Turks. And England, of course, as you know, in 1948, when they said partition, they would have given them a state. If the Jewish nation would have one part of Palestine, and they would have had it. Until after Israel was established as a homeland, they never wanted their own land. Nothing was ever said about them wanting their land. As a matter of fact, they loved to live. When Israel was founded, there were very few Arabs actually living in Israel. But when the Jews came and built it up with their own hands, they came and farmed the land. They gave jobs to the Arabs, like a few dollars a year maybe, and they came from all over just to live in the land. The Jews have always lived in Israel. Since the Romans threw them out, there was always a remnant, a small remnant of Jews living in Israel. They never abandoned the state. Like today, people at the risk of their life, I don't know if you're aware of that, they go to the grave of Rachel and they pray there. Why do they want to do that? They don't want to abandon the land that really belongs to the Jewish nation. So they have buses with soldiers on the buses and shatterproof glass going every day to the burial ground of Rachel and Abraham is buried. That's in Hebron. If you see how the settlers who lived there, we call them the settlers, they were asked to live there by the government. They built beautiful homes there. I have been there. I have never met such beautiful people. The way the press portrays them is unbelievable. They all went to Harvard, Yale. There's a class of people because they know we cannot just leave the land for which our forefathers sacrificed everything. So they are still living in that land. They're not settlers. They're living there like people. They have schools, theaters, everything. Of course, what you see on television doesn't show you the kind of people that they are. Therefore, I have told you what you may not realize, that this big lie that we are occupying Arab land and therefore they have a right to kill every Jew and do suicide attacks and go on buses and kill innocent children, they have a right to do that, is certainly a tremendous lie perpetrated upon the world. I myself was in Savallo in a pizza parlor with all my grandchildren on that fateful day, but I left. I left about 20 minutes before a suicide bomber entered and killed everyone there in that place. Only God helped us that we decided we're tired and let's go out. Can you imagine how we feel when all the people who ate with us, children and everyone, after we walked out, they were all dead. Unless you've been there and see, then you cannot really know the tragedy that's going on today. However, with my grandson's bar mitzvah, my son Mitchell first, who's a prominent lawyer, told the story about Israel and about Daniel, and he says if the world today would have more Daniels who tell the truth and stick to their principles, we certainly would have a better world in which we could live. And I hope that ultimately this is going to happen. We should all realize to be better people. And we should all realize that in this world we have to live together. And maybe that way we will bring about the Messiah, who certainly is going to help every Jew in the world. I'm sure you heard this latest joke. Why isn't the Messiah coming today? And the answer is his mother will not let him go to Israel alone. Very funny. But we are going to Israel, and we have children living in Israel, and the whole world today is dangerous anyway. I hope you enjoyed my lecture.